Most people ruin their cucumbers before summer even really begins, and they do it thinking they are helping them. They water every evening because the heat scares them. They pour nitrogen under every bush because the leaves look pale. They let the vines grow however they want because more leaves must mean more cucumbers. Then July comes and suddenly the bushes turn into a jungle with almost no fruit. Yellow leaves start spreading from the bottom. Tiny cucumbers dry out and fall off. Flowers appear, but nothing grows from them except empty blossoms. And the worst part is most people blame the weather, when in reality the damage started weeks earlier with 3 simple mistakes almost everyone repeats every summer. I learned this the hard way many years ago after nearly losing an entire row of cucumbers right in the middle of July. The bushes looked huge from a distance, thick leaves everywhere, long vines climbing the strings. But when I bent down and started looking carefully, there were almost no real cucumbers hiding inside. The plants were spending all their strength feeding useless greenery instead of fruit. And once that process starts, most people panic and make it even worse with expensive fertilizers and chemicals that only stress the plant more. What finally saved my harvest was not some miracle product from a garden store. It was an old method one elderly man showed me when I was still learning how to grow food properly. He looked at my cucumbers for maybe 30 seconds and immediately said, "You are feeding leaves instead of roots, and you are suffocating the plant with your own care." At first, I did not understand what he meant. But after I changed just a few things, the entire bed came back to life. New cucumbers started appearing almost every morning. The yellowing slowed down. The bushes stayed productive deep into autumn, while other gardens around me already looked tired and burned out from summer heat. And today, I want to show you exactly what causes cucumbers to stop producing in summer and how to fix it before the season is lost, because most people still make the same mistakes every single year without even realizing it. First, I will show you why cucumbers suddenly go into empty blossom mode even when the bushes look healthy from outside, and this part surprises almost everyone, once they finally see what is really happening. Most people think cucumbers stop producing because the heat is too strong or because the soil is weak by midsummer, but usually the real problem starts much earlier and it happens quietly while the bushes still look green and healthy. I see this every year. Big, beautiful cucumber vines climbing everywhere with thick, dark leaves that make people proud at first glance. But then they start noticing something strange. The flowers keep coming, but almost all of them are empty blossoms. Tiny cucumbers appear for a few days and suddenly turn yellow and dry up. The lower leaves begin spotting and fading. And the bush slowly stops giving fruit, even though it still looks alive. What causes this is usually the first big mistake almost everybody makes in early summer: too much nitrogen and too much water near the surface. People feed cucumbers like they are trying to grow a forest. Fresh manure, strong chemical fertilizers, chicken droppings every week. The plant reacts fast. Huge leaves explode everywhere. Thick stems stretch upward. But inside the plant, something changes. Instead of preparing fruit, the cucumber goes into survival growth mode. It keeps building greenery because it thinks conditions are unstable. And when the roots sit constantly wet near the surface from daily watering, the plant becomes even lazier underground. The roots stop searching deep for moisture. They stay weak and shallow. Then the first real summer heat arrives and suddenly the bush cannot support itself anymore. Leaves start drooping by noon. Flowers abort. Fruit becomes bitter or crooked. Most people see this and add even more fertilizer, which only pushes the plant further into leaf production instead of cucumbers. Many years ago, an old gardener explained it to me very simply. He said cucumbers should suffer just a little early in life, or they become spoiled for the rest of the season. At first, that sounded strange, but now I understand exactly what he meant. If you water lightly every evening, the roots never grow deep. If you overfeed constantly, the plant never prepares for heavy fruiting because it stays busy making leaves. What changed everything for me was switching to deep watering only every few days and feeding much less than most people recommend. I stopped chasing giant green bushes and started focusing on strong roots and balanced growth. And the difference was unbelievable because within 2 weeks the plants completely changed behavior. The empty blossoms slowed down. New female flowers started appearing lower on the vines. The bushes looked calmer, but the fruit production exploded. But there is another mistake that destroys cucumbers even faster in hot weather, and most people do it while trying to help the plant stay healthy. The second big mistake that quietly destroys cucumbers in summer is something people almost never suspect because it looks completely harmless from the outside. They let the bushes grow wild. No shaping, no pruning, no airflow. At first, it even feels satisfying because the vines spread fast and the bed starts looking thick and alive. But inside that green wall, the plant slowly begins suffocating itself. Moisture stays trapped between the leaves after every watering and after every cool night. Air cannot move properly through the bush. Old lower leaves stop getting sunlight. And this is exactly when trouble starts creeping in. Powdery mildew appears first on tired leaves near the bottom. Then yellow spots spread higher. The plant wastes enormous energy trying to keep old useless leaves alive instead of feeding cucumbers. I remember one summer when my own cucumbers looked beautiful from far away, but when I pushed the leaves aside inside, it smelled damp and heavy like wet cloth left too long in the shade. Tiny yellow cucumbers were dropping everywhere, and the vines looked exhausted even though I watered and fed them constantly. An older neighbor came over and laughed quietly. He said, "Your cucumbers are not growing anymore because they cannot breathe." That same evening, he showed me something most people never do. We removed every yellow leaf touching the ground. Then he pinched off weak side shoots near the bottom and cleared space between the vines so air and morning light could finally move through the bed again. Honestly, it felt scary at first because the bushes suddenly looked thinner and less impressive. I thought maybe I ruined them completely. But about a week later, the entire planting changed. The leaves became darker and healthier. New flowers appeared higher on the vines. The cucumbers started growing straighter and faster. And, most importantly, the bushes stopped wasting strength on old, dying leaves. Very few gardeners do this consistently because people are afraid to cut healthy greenery. But cucumbers are not like wild weeds in nature. If you let them spend energy everywhere, they slowly lose control of fruit production. What works much better is guiding the plant carefully from the beginning. I now remove the first lower shoots and flowers near the base early while the plant is still young. It sounds strange because removing flowers feels wrong, but this old method forces the roots and main stem to become much stronger before heavy fruiting starts. Later in summer, those same plants outproduce untouched bushes by a huge margin because they stay balanced instead of collapsing under their own overgrowth. And there is one more mistake that pushes cucumbers into permanent stress during hot weather, especially in July when most gardens suddenly stop producing almost overnight. The third mistake is the one that usually finishes cucumbers off right in the middle of summer, and the strange part is most people think they are saving the plants when they do it. They start watering more and more once the heat arrives. Every evening the hose comes out. The soil stays constantly wet near the surface. Sometimes people even spray the leaves at sunset thinking the bushes need cooling after a hot day. For a few days the cucumbers seem happier because the leaves stop wilting in the afternoon. But then something changes very fast. The roots begin starving for air underground. The soil turns heavy and sour. The lower stems weaken. Fungal problems wake up immediately in warm, wet conditions, and suddenly the bushes that looked healthy last week start collapsing one by one. I learned this lesson during one brutally hot summer when temperatures stayed high for weeks. I was watering every evening because I felt sorry for the plants. The leaves looked stressed by noon, so I thought more water must be the answer. Instead, the cucumbers became pale and soft. The fruits lost their crispness. Yellow leaves spread everywhere. Then an old man at the market asked me one simple question. He said, "When do your cucumbers actually dry out if you water them every day?" That question stayed in my head because I realized the soil around my bushes never had a chance to breathe. Cucumbers love moisture, but they hate swamp conditions. Since then, I completely changed the way I water in summer, and it transformed my harvests more than any fertilizer ever did. Now, I water deeply only in the early morning while the soil is still cool. I soak the ground slowly so moisture goes deep where the roots should be living. Then I leave the surface mostly alone. No evening watering, no constant sprinkling, and most importantly, I always keep mulch around the plants. Old straw, dry grass, even shredded leaves work fine. That layer changes everything because the soil underneath stays cool and damp much longer without becoming soggy. The roots grow deeper, searching for moisture instead of sitting weak near the surface. And deep roots are what carry cucumbers through summer heat without panic. Most people still do the opposite. They water lightly every evening and create shallow roots that suffer the moment heat becomes serious. Another forgotten trick that helped me enormously was using warm water instead of cold well water during hot periods. Cold water shocks cucumbers badly, especially after a long, hot day. Warm, settled water feels natural to the roots, and the bushes respond almost immediately with steadier growth and stronger fruit set. But even with proper watering, there is one hidden problem that quietly steals half the harvest from many cucumber beds, and almost nobody notices it until the season is nearly over. There is one hidden problem that steals huge cucumber harvests every summer, and most people never even notice it, because from the outside, the bushes still look green and alive. The plant keeps growing leaves. New flowers still appear. But the cucumbers themselves slowly become fewer, smaller, and weaker. What causes this is simple exhaustion. By midsummer, the bush is overloaded with old vines, old leaves, and too many growing points all fighting each other for food. The roots cannot support everything anymore, especially during long heat. And this is where an old, forgotten shaping method completely changes the season. Very few gardeners still do it because it looks too simple to matter, but once I started using it, my cucumbers stayed productive almost until cold weather arrived. Around the middle of summer, I stop letting every vine grow endlessly. I begin choosing which shoots deserve the plant's strength and which ones quietly drain it away. Weak-side shoots with little fruit get removed early. Old lower leaves that already served their purpose come off little by little every few days. I never strip the bush bare at once because that shocks the plant badly in hot weather. Slow, careful thinning works much better. The goal is simple. Sunlight and moving air should reach through the entire bed, not just the top leaves. When this happens, the plant suddenly redirects energy into new fruit again instead of trying to maintain old exhausted growth. One thing that surprised me years ago was how much cucumbers love stable rhythm. If one week you ignore them and the next week you attack the bed, cutting everything, feeding heavily, and flooding with water, the plants panic. They react by dropping flowers or producing bitter fruit. But small steady care every few days keeps them calm and productive. I now spend maybe 10 quiet minutes in the cucumber bed each morning. I look underneath the leaves. I check for yellowing early. I remove 1 or 2 unnecessary shoots. I guide young vines where I want them. That small routine prevents huge problems later. Another old trick many people forgot is feeding cucumbers with very weak natural solutions instead of strong fertilizers. Once fruiting starts, I use diluted ash water, or weak compost tea, maybe once every 10 days, not more. Ash especially helps during summer because cucumbers need potassium for fruit, not endless nitrogen for leaves. Too much feeding late in season creates giant greenery and almost no harvest. I learned this after 1 year when my bushes looked enormous but produced less than half the cucumbers of my neighbor's smaller plants. He smiled and said, "Your cucumbers are eating too well to work hard." And honestly, he was right. But there is one final thing that decides whether cucumber bushes survive until autumn or collapse completely before August ends, and this part is where most gardens quietly fail without understanding why. The final thing that decides whether cucumbers keep producing until autumn or completely collapse before the season ends is something most people ignore because they focus only on feeding and watering. But old gardeners always watched this carefully because they understood one simple truth. A tired cucumber bush cannot recover if it keeps carrying too many old fruits at the same time. This is where the plant slowly burns itself out. People often leave oversized cucumbers hanging too long because they want them bigger, or because they miss harvest for a few days. Meanwhile, the bush treats those giant fruits like full-grown seeds that must be finished at all costs. Almost all energy gets redirected into them while new flowers and young cucumbers begin starving. That is why one neglected cucumber hidden under leaves can quietly slow down an entire section of the bed. Years ago, I noticed something interesting in the gardens of older people who always had cucumbers until cold weather. They harvested constantly. Small, medium, large, it did not matter. Every morning they carried out little buckets and picked almost everything ready. The bushes stayed light, active, and productive because the plant never reached the feeling that its life cycle was complete. Once I started doing the same, the difference became obvious very fast. New cucumbers formed almost non-stop because the vine stayed in growth mode instead of seed finishing mode. And there is another small trick connected to this that very few people still remember. Toward late summer, when nights slowly become cooler, I stop pushing the plants aggressively. No more heavy feeding, no more overwatering. Instead, I focus on stability and warmth around the roots. Fresh mulch helps enormously during this period because it protects the soil from sudden temperature swings. Sometimes I even place dark containers of water near the bed because they collect warmth during the day and slowly release it overnight. It sounds old-fashioned, but these tiny temperature differences keep cucumbers active much longer than people expect. One season, my neighbor's plants were already yellow and nearly finished by late August, while mine still pushed fresh flowers and crisp cucumbers every few days. He kept asking what fertilizer I used, and honestly, the answer disappointed him because there was no expensive secret. The difference came from rhythm balance and not exhausting the plants early in summer. Most cucumber problems start when people try to force too much too fast. Huge leaves, huge feeding, huge watering, but cucumbers reward calm, steady care much more than aggressive treatment. And once you understand this, the entire season changes because the bushes stop fighting for survival and finally start doing what they were meant to do all along, which is produce food steadily for months instead of burning out halfway through summer. By the time most people give up on their cucumbers in late summer, the real problem is usually not disease, not bad seeds, and not bad luck. The bushes simply spent the entire season fighting mistakes instead of building strength. Too much water, too much fertilizer, too many leaves, too many old fruits hanging and draining energy. I used to think growing cucumbers was about feeding harder and reacting faster every time something looked wrong. But after many years, I realized the healthiest cucumber beds are usually the calmest ones. The gardener is not constantly panicking. He is not pouring chemicals every weekend. He is not chasing giant leafy bushes. He simply keeps the plants balanced, steady, and comfortable from the beginning. That is what allows cucumbers to keep producing long after other gardens start fading out. Some of my best harvests came from seasons when I actually did less, not more. I stopped trying to impress myself with huge vines and focused instead on roots' airflow, stable moisture, and regular harvesting. And suddenly the cucumbers became sweeter, straighter, and more reliable. The bushes stayed green longer. The yellowing slowed down. Even during difficult heat, the plants recovered faster because they were not overloaded or spoiled by constant feeding. One thing I always tell people now is this: cucumbers love consistency much more than intensity. They do not need expensive bottles, colorful powders, or complicated systems to give a strong harvest. Most of the time, they simply need the gardener to stop making the same 3 mistakes that quietly destroy the season before summer even reaches its hottest point. Deep roots matter more than giant leaves. Airflow matters more than thick greenery. Stable care matters more than aggressive feeding. These old methods survived for decades because they actually work in real gardens with real weather, not just on fertilizer advertisements. And once you see the difference with your own eyes, it becomes very hard to go back to the old way of growing. Even now, every summer I still walk through the cucumber bed early in the morning with coffee in my hand, checking the leaves, touching the vines, picking the ready fruit one by one. It becomes peaceful after a while because the plants stop fighting you and start working with you. And honestly, that may be the best part of all this. Not just bigger harvests, but the feeling that your garden finally becomes simple again. Next time, I will show you another old trick that helps cucumbers survive extreme heat without bitterness and without daily watering, because most gardeners are still losing half their harvest during hot weeks without realizing the real reason.